You all read bioinformation, watched some videos of Dr. Cerf. You don't need me to introduce who he is. So I'm going to take this introduction time to introduce how I know him. Back in about mid-2011, you've heard about my startup in RFID. That's when we started at mid-2011. And in January of 2012, I read an article about a session that Vint did at CES, Consumer Electronics Show, focused on using technology, applying it to elderly and supporting elderly people. One of his many causes, because you have many things that you are passionate about. And that is just one. And we were building our product for families with kids to find their kids' stuff, but it became pretty obviously pretty quickly how you could adapt it to elderly and help people, elderly people find their stuff, maybe even put it away because you have a tag on the stuff, you get a tag on where it goes, so it can tell you where to put it. And on a whim, on a hopeful note, I sent a cold email to Dr. Cerf explaining what we were doing. And I was going to be out in, he was in Crystal City, Virginia, and I was going to be out there in about 3 weeks for business, and asking if, I could buy him some coffee or have half an hour of his time to pick his brain. And I, hoped to get some sort of response. You responded very quickly, to my delight and surprise. Very positively, wanted to, you had come up with other ideas, which you let me know once I was there, and invited me to his house. To discuss this. So about 3 weeks later, I knocked on the door. Your lovely wife offered me tea, which I still remember. I thought that was so sweet. And we go down to your home office. It doesn't look like that's where you are now.
That's where I am. I'm in my
home
office in the basement.
In home office in the basement. And you gave me, we were there for hours. It was 2 or 3 hours. There is nothing more pleasurable than bouncing ideas and applications with you. You're sharp and intelligent and experienced, and you care and you're passionate. And we had, I had so much fun. I assume you also had fun because you have consented to stay in touch with me, which I appreciate. We took the prototype I had and we used it in your wine cellar, because that was one of the things you were thinking about, was how to find and identify and have more information about the wines when they're in the cellar. And we have kept in touch over the years. He gave a speech, which is where my children are, and one of my children got to meet you a couple of years ago, which was really lovely for me. And I really could not think of a better final guest speaker for this class. Vint is the epitome of leadership, intellect, humility, kindness, and grace. And with that, I give you Dr. Cerf.
Wow, well, thank you very much, Carrie, and hello, everyone. Gosh, that sounds like I died yesterday, and it was kind of like an obituary. I agree. I'm still going strong.
Yes.
So this class is about leadership, and although I don't pretend to know everything there is to know about leadership, I have a little bit of knowledge, and I'm happy to share it with you. The first thing I would observe is that leadership is kind of getting people to want to do what you want to do. And even when I was in the Defense Department, I wasn't in the military, I was a civilian in the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And I was the guy writing checks to pay for research to be done. This is, of course, the internet work. And one of the things I discovered fairly quickly is that even if you're the guy writing the checks, which definitely gets you attention, you still had to work to explain to people why it was you wanted to get something done, a particular thing done, and why it was important for them to want to do that too. That sounds a lot like sales. And so I will tell you that leadership often is about learning to sell ideas, learning to sell objectives, learning to convince people that they want to do what you want to do. So that's one thing. Now, one of my former bosses hired me to build an electronic mail service way back in 1983. Now, some of you need to realize that electronic mail was invented in 1971 on the old ARPANET project, but it had become commercialized. And so I was asked in 1983 to build a commercial email service for a company called MCI, which is a big telephone company at the time, a competitor to AT&T. And the first thing that my boss said when we started talking about this project is that to do the impossible, first you have to believe it isn't. And so that's one of the things you have to convince other people of, is that what you want to do and the time frame in which you want to do it isn't impossible. So that's an important thing to overcome. Third thing that I would draw to your attention is that the former president of Stanford University and now the chairman of the board of Google, of Alphabet, and Alphabet owns Google among several other properties. John, in his days as president of Stanford, wrote a book called Leading Matters. And It Does Matter, which is, of course, a double entendre. But he has a chapter in there about empathy. And I could not overemphasize how important it is to not only be, but be seen as and understood as empathetic for those who work for you. Without empathy, it's very hard to gain loyalty. And so I would urge you to check out a copy of that book and read the chapter about empathy. You should read the rest of it too. It's a really good book. Now, my engineers occasionally sneer at the sales department because they think of them as a bunch of rah-rah folks, and there's always contests and other things. And they don't seem to see this as a serious activity, whereas engineering is building things. It's turning science fiction into reality. So I have to remind the sales guy, or remind the engineers, that if the sales guys don't succeed in selling what the engineers built, the engineers aren't going to get paid. And this puts a rather sober point in front of them, and often they get the point that they had better be attentive to making things useful for people, otherwise the salespeople won't succeed. Now, when I was running the MCML project, I decided to hang pagers on my engineers. And you should understand that the typical thing is that the marketing department figures out there's a product they want and it has certain features. The engineers go figure out how to build that, and then they hand that over to operations, and the operations guys try to make it run. And I decided that the fastest way to get rid of bugs in the system was to hang pagers on the guys who wrote the code, the engineers, so that if something didn't work, everybody, the ops guys and the engineers, got paged. They were awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning. You would be surprised how quickly bugs got fixed because the engineers didn't like getting awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning with a bug. So that's an example of essentially putting yourself into the other guy's shoes. I also made a deal with marketing. I said, look, I won't make stuff that you can't sell as long as you don't sell stuff that I can't make. And that's a good deal, and I've persisted in that kind of negotiating that deal with marketing ever since. The sixth thing I would point out is that humility is really important. You don't know everything. And so you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions. It's not a sign of weakness to want to learn something, especially from the people that report to you. I think it's important to be candid with everybody. And I think it's even important to show some vulnerability. And the reason for that is that you don't want people to assume, for example, that you're always right. Some people think of leadership as never backing down, never changing your mind, always knowing exactly what to do and telling everybody what to do. I can guarantee you that that's the worst form of leadership, because in the end, if you actually didn't know what you were doing, you will lead people astray, and they will not forgive you for that. The seventh lesson that I've learned is that you need to make sure that the people that report to you, and of course you want to propagate this down the management chain, are comfortable telling you when they're overloaded. In other words, be comfortable asking for help. And you need that, because the worst situation you can get into is where a project has people who are totally overloaded, can't really meet the targets, and they're afraid to tell you that. And so that you get way down the track, and then you learn it's not going to work. You're not going to be done on time. People are overloaded, couldn't get the work done. And they didn't tell you soon enough for you to do something about it. What could you do? You might add more work, more support for a particular task. You might change the objectives of the task so that, in fact, it's not as onerous as it might otherwise have been. But if you don't have enough time to make those changes because people were afraid to tell you that they were overloaded or that there was some other big obstacle, then you're not showing smart leadership at all. Now, I have had problems in the past where staff have assumed that since I said, this is what we're going to do, and this is the direction we're going in, that I've already figured out all of the potential hazards and I've discounted them all. You would be wrong if you thought that. And in particular, I found it important and sometimes hard to get the team to tell me when I'm about to do something stupid because I didn't think about it, or I didn't know about some other, as the economists say, I didn't know about some externality. You have to work extra hard to get people to challenge what it is you want to do. Now, you don't want an argumentative team that never, that never does anything without having a big argument. But you absolutely want people to raise their hands and say, Vint, do you know the following thing will cause this to fall over? And there's a high probability that that thing will happen. You want them to be comfortable raising that issue. Now, it could be I have some information that they don't have that mitigates the problem. And I might say, I thought of that and it's okay, or I'm accepting the risk. But you don't want to lose the possibility of discovering you're about to make a really dumb move because somebody on the team knows that, but's afraid to tell you, or assumes that you've already discounted it, which you might not have. If you had to take away one mantra for leadership, it's listen, listen, and listen. Listen to your customers. Listen to your peers. Listen to your reports. Listen to your boss. But listening is really important, and you have to show that you're listening. You have to show feedback that you've got the message and you are reflecting what it is. I'll tell you what I did when I was doing the MCI Mail project. This is after the internet. I would meet weekly with the customer service team. These are the people who receive calls from the customers who were using our product and needed help. There was nothing more valuable than getting direct information from the customer service people about what worked and what didn't work for our customers, because I could feed that directly back into engineering and do redesign and come back with something that worked better, at least we hope so. So listening really counts. And I realized, and I'm sitting here just talking and you're listening, and I haven't given myself or you, me a chance to listen to you, and you a chance to either ask questions or raise issues, or even, have a disagreement about any of the suggestions that I'm making. So the last point I want to suggest to you before we get into the Q&A is that experience really counts. And even when you are feeling what's called imposter syndrome, and what am I doing here? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what to do. Everybody gets into situations like that from time to time. And when people ask what to do, my response is get help. That's generally good advice for almost anything. And if you're going to do a really big project like the internet, the first thing you look for is to get help, particularly from people who are smarter than you are. In my case, that wasn't a very high bar to jump over. But Bob Kahn and I, when we did the work, were two hands on one pencil writing the spec. But we immediately got help from some incredibly smart people scattered around the world. It helped that we could write a check and say, we will pay for the research that's needed to do this. But I guarantee you that doing something big means you better get help, competent help. So Carrie, I'll stop there. I would not mind rattling on with these very pithy adages, but perhaps it will be better if the students ask questions and I'll be able to respond to something that they care more about than just listening to me and my platitudes.
Let's do that, and we'll see how that goes, and we may give you some more time to tell us more about your experience, etc. I will do what I often do first to give a preamble here that I did not set Vint up, and in this case, really, Vint's time is extremely valuable. There are many, many people who want it, so we did not have a pre-conversation about this other than me letting him know about the class and what it's about, and your questions to him. He got those this morning. But thank you, Vint, because you basically just went through the semester, hitting the high points. So you validated some of what I've been teaching, and I appreciate that. And I will ask, based on that, one of the things you said is, don't hesitate to ask questions. People assume that and I think you can see me, right? Okay.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
People assume that you have already thought of their objection. Right. One of the things we've learned is that to build trust requires, competency. And sometimes what proves competency is all those things hanging on the wall behind you. So do you think that your competency becomes intimidating? Do you think that sometimes people don't speak up because you are one of the fathers of the internet? And what should these guys do when they are feeling starstruck or like their wall has nothing and has all that on it, and who are they to speak up?
Well, it's kind of embarrassing in a way. I probably should have put one of those fake backdrops. That's what's sometimes called an ego wall. And, I'm down here in my little basement office, and I have been for the last 2 years. And I have a lot of stuff like this. There's more, often one of the other rooms full of drawers. And so I felt sort of compelled to put at least some of it on the wall. And honestly, I am proud of some of these awards. They're really quite unusual. I mean, the Queen Elizabeth Award for engineering was a big deal, not just because it's the Queen Elizabeth Award, but it was for engineering. It wasn't for scientific research, or it wasn't for building a big company. It was for doing good engineering. So, and that's important because there weren't very many awards that focused on that in particular. But I have had the experience of people assuming that, oh, I'm too busy and I shouldn't be disturbed. Or I've already figured all this out, and even though what I said for them to do sounded like it was a mistake, or it was just stupid, or wasn't understandable, that they better do what I told them to do because I know better than they do. And believe me, I have worked very, very hard, and I continue to work hard to convince people not to make that assumption. Don't make the assumption that I'm too busy for something. If I am busy, I'll tell you I'm busy, but I want people to come to me. I want them to interrupt. I want them to send emails. I want the door to feel metaphorically open at all times. And that's a very important trait, I think, of good leadership, is making sure people are comfortable coming to you and don't make the assumption that you're too busy to talk to them. So our little chat, which grew into a multi-hour discussion, if I had run out of time for some reason, I'm sure I would have told you that, Carrie. But by good fortune, it was a more open day than usual. And so I took advantage of that.
And I am all the better for it. So thank you so much. So, learn from this a couple of things. It's worth reaching out. You never know what's going to happen. Even if it had just replied an email with a couple of ideas, that would have been fantastic. And two, making that assumption that someone, and obviously you don't walk around with that wall behind you, but people know who you are at this point. And when you come into a room, they listen to you first in a lot of places because of all you've done and your Queen Elizabeth Award and all of those. Don't assume that that person doesn't want to hear from you, that they thought it through. Because it doesn't necessarily mean they have. But obviously, when people approach you respectfully, that is going to go much farther than if they actually just started telling you how wrong you are. I would assume. Okay.
Also, actually, it doesn't have to be questions necessarily. It can be just tell me what you're up to, what you're trying to accomplish. I might have a reaction to that. Like I might say, gee, that's a wonderful idea. It's fabulous. I'll tell you, let me give you an example of a piece of advice I got. So this is where you go, if you want to get good advice, go find somebody that has a reason to give you good advice. So at one point in my career, I thought about buying the rights to a 6-novel series. It was written in the 1950s. And it was a science fiction series. It was called The Lensman. And it was about in future history, a human civilization that it's spacefaring, and they're going all over the galaxy. And they end up with an implacable enemy in another galaxy, and they end up needing to defend themselves, and they wind up with something called the lens, which they wore on the wrist, but it gave them telepathic and empathic powers, among other things. So they could communicate, any of them that were lensmen could communicate with each other anywhere in the galaxy. So there were a lot of non-human species were involved as well. It's soap opera. It's pure soap opera. The author was E.E. Smith. And if you care about this, E.E. Smith and the Lensman series is where it looked. Anyway, so I've read the series more than once. And I thought, well, this would be kind of cool. I'll get the movie rights, and then we'll go talk to somebody, and let's see if I can't actually get somebody to, put money into doing a series, kind of like Lord of the Rings. And so I thought, well, I better get some advice about this because I've never done anything like that. So I called up Jim Cameron, whom you will know from various of his things like Avatar and Titanic and many other amazing films. So I figured he'd be the right guy to talk to. And to his credit, he actually took the call, which was, it's just a cold call. I'd never met him before. I told him what it is I wanted to do. And he said, first of all, he knew the series. He was familiar with it. He read it himself. Second, he said that he would love to do something like that. And he was sure that all 12 people who would go and watch that movie would really enjoy it. And then he said, by the way, there's a lot of aliens in there. And so this is going to cost a lot of money, either in costumes or in computer generated imagery. And so this is not going to be a cheap movie to make. And so after taking all that on board, I decided maybe it wasn't the right idea to go buy the rights. So I didn't do that. But it was immensely valuable to have someone with the experience that Cameron has had doing very spectacular things on the science fiction front in particular, to be willing to share that kind of advice. So that's another example of an assumption that you might not make, and that's that this person isn't going to help you or won't pay any attention or will refuse to respond. The worst that'll happen is that they won't respond or will say no. And if that's the worst, why not take the risk?
And with that, let's open it up. Daniel, just because you're in the middle, if you would come up, and we're going to look at.
Is right here good?
Let's come a little closer to the owl and hold on.
Well, actually, if you come and sit down in the chair near Carrie, that actually works beautifully, because I have that table. There we are. I can see you very clearly. So who are you? Yeah, who are you first?
Nice to meet you. My name is. This is my last day of school, so this is.
Oh man, so I'm standing in the way of graduation. God, that's a dangerous place to be.
You went finals, Vint. So
okay.
Still a hurdle. This is the last day of classes.
So this is pretty sweet. like myself, there's a lot of graduating seniors here in this room. I think the majority of this class is seniors. So I wanted to ask you if you could send us a message as we begin the next chapter in our lives. We're going to start working for a company or maybe work on our own startup. What would you say is kind of the decision-making process that you go through when thinking about joining a new, a new company or working on a new project? Do you go for things that excite you, or perhaps maybe it's okay to do something for the time being because it can serve you financially? So I just kind of want to get some of your thoughts on that.
Okay, well, let's unpack that because that's got a lot of content to it. The first thing I would observe is if you're graduating with a mountain load of debt, it might very well be the first thing you want to look for is anything that helps you, get rid of the debt. Now, maybe Mr. Biden will keep pushing that off. That would be nice. I was lucky; I didn't graduate with any debt. I had a scholarship, and it helped me a lot. So, pretending for just a minute that that's not a defining factor, then the absolute most important way to be successful is to find something to do, first of all, that you get paid for, because you do have to make a living somehow. Second, that you're good at, and third, that you like doing it. And it's not a trivial thing to find combinations like that. I've been super lucky in my career. Everything I have ever done has been fun and interesting and challenging, and for the most part successful. So, but the combination is almost like magic. If you're good at it, and you like doing it, then it's not work. And if they pay you for it, it's amazing. So I have a title at Google, which I didn't ask for. I joined the company. I actually sent a note to Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO at the time, and whom I had known as the chief technology officer of Sun Microsystems. And I sent him a note saying, "Hi, Eric, do you want some help?" And this is in 2005. So the company is already 7 years old and quite successful. And I said, "You want some help?" And he sent a note back saying, "Yes." That was my job interview. And I joined the company, and they said, Larry and Eric and Sergey said, "So what title do you want?" And I thought about it for a while, and I said, "Well, how about Archduke?" And that was a great title. And so they went away, and then they came back and they said, "The previous Archduke was Ferdinand, and he was assassinated in 1914, and it started World War I. So maybe that's a bad title to have. Why don't you be our chief internet evangelist?" I said, "Okay, I can do that." So so then we had to figure out, what does it mean? What's that job? And I've been trying to figure that out for the last 16 years. We're making it up as we go along. But it's a wonderful rubric under which to work, because it means I can spend time trying to figure out how to get more internet into everybody's hands, how to lobby governments to make policy decisions that encourage investment in internet technology, look for educational themes that help people make better use of it than they can now. And today, of course, you and I both know there's risks associated with being online on the internet: misinformation and disinformation and malware and ransomware and bullying and all these other things, which are amplified in the network effects of the internet. Of course, the other side is true too. The fabulous ability to find information instantaneously and to track people down and to do collaborative work is unparalleled in history. So the good part is fantastic, and the bad part is really annoying, and we got to figure out what to do. So my advice is, try to find something that you want to do, that you like to do, that you're good at, and they'll pay you for. And often, the opportunities that show up may not look like opportunities. So, a lot of people come and say, "Help me plan my career." And after I stop laughing, I have to explain to people that nobody plans their careers. You can try. This is like the venture guy that says, "I want a business plan that shows me how you're going to make, $200 million in the 5th year of your operation." Everybody I have ever met, for the most part, who started a business never manages to make that business plan work. Something else happens instead. So Larry and Sergey didn't bother with the business plan. Now, maybe that's bad advice for going to venture capitalists and they'll insist on it. But the honest truth is planning your career doesn't work. What does work is being attentive to opportunity. And when you're young, like you are, you still have 50 years, 60 years of career ahead of you. That means you can take some risk. And so you should feel comfortable taking some risks at the beginning of your career, especially because you got plenty of time to recover if it doesn't work. So now I'll give you one other, if you don't mind, rattling old surf rattling on here. Let me give you two examples where I made stupid decisions. The first one comes, let's see, yes, okay. So the first one comes, I'm at UCLA, I've been working on the ARPANET, this is the predecessor to the internet. And I finished my PhD and I was an undergraduate at Stanford. So Stanford said, why don't you come up and tell us about your dissertation work? So I come up and I do my thing and I go back to UCLA, and a few weeks later the phone rings. They call and offer me a post as a joint appointment in computer science and electrical engineering. This, by the way, is 1972. So I think about this, and remember, I was an undergraduate at Stanford, and I know how smart the Stanford students are, and I decided, you know what? I don't have anything to tell them. I don't have anything to teach them, really. And so I said no. Well, shows you, how dumb I was. They didn't take no for an answer. The phone kept ringing. The faculty were calling me. Don Knuth, the guy that wrote The Art of Computer Programming, and a whole bunch of other people who'd written the textbooks that I used to study with, called on the phone and said, you have to come to Stanford. Now I realize I'm speaking to Berkeley crowd here, and so, who cares? Why would you go to Stanford? Well, my answer to that is beat Cal. So, and by the way, I have a lot of friends at Berkeley, and some of them work right here at Google, like Dave Patterson, for example. So, so anyway, I said no, and eventually they just refused to take no for an answer. Well, thank God that they did that, because of course, when I get up to Stanford, the next thing that happens in the spring is my colleague, Bob Kahn, who worked on the ARPANET with me, he was at Bolt Beranek and Newman, and I was at UCLA, shows up in my office at Stanford and he says, we have a problem. And my response was, what do you mean we? And he said, well, with this ARPANET thing worked really well. Now the Defense Department is saying, why don't we use computers in command and control? And so he's thinking about this, saying, well, wait a minute, the ARPANET is built out of dedicated telephone circuits connecting computers in air-conditioned rooms that don't get up and move around. But if you're going to use computers in command and control, you're going to have to put them in ships at sea and in airplanes and mobile vehicles. Can't use telephone cable for that. So he'd already started working on a mobile packet radio network and a packet satellite network to go along with the original ARPANET. And then he said, they're all different. We don't know how to hook them all together. How do we make it look uniform? That was the internet problem. So we started working on the internet design in the spring of 1973. So it is, we succeed in doing the design, we do implementation. I'm doing all of this at Stanford. I have a little group of people who are doing the detailed design of the TCP/IP protocols. And then in 1976, ARPA calls and says, why don't you come back here and run the whole thing? And I thought about this for a little while and I said no. Now, why did I say no? Well, I thought, this is a big deal. It's, it's a major program. And if I show up and I run the program and I screw it all up, all my friends will know that I, failed. And so I decided I didn't want to take the risk. So I said no. Well, they wouldn't take no for an answer either. So I ended up joining the Defense Department in 1976. And of course, I don't regret this at all. So the point here is that it's not hard to make the wrong decision for the wrong reasons. And the particular one there was risk taking. And so I now believe that especially early on in your career, it's okay to take risk. In fact, you should take risk. Now, I don't mean doing something stupid, like jumping out of the 12th floor to make sure that gravity still works. But finding a job that you really like, even if there's risk, is terrific. And sometimes risk will show up after a giant failure. And in my a number of my friends have had major career changes because something went wrong. But the thing that showed up afterwards turned out to be better and more interesting and more successful than the thing that failed. So sometimes opportunity is hiding in obscure clothing. So there's a really long answer to your question, but the chief internet evangelist feels free to sermonize at a drop of a question. So thanks for that and good luck to you.
Thank you.
I'm pointing right at you.
This is called the hot seat, right?
Let's see, it's a
Oh, you
long.
just had to show off your Berkeley shirt, didn't you? Well, all right, fair enough.
I Stanford in your bio, I had to represent. Thank you so much for coming today. I can't tell you how exciting this is for me as someone who grew up with the internet, early chat rooms, flash games, Facebook, my first iPhone, now getting big into Web3. My question, that was a great previous question, even greater answer for all of us. Focuses more on a current global issue that us future leaders will have to deal with, and one that we can generally benefit from your experience. With the rise of global misinformation and the big talks with Elon Musk buying Twitter, it's certainly in the news, and there's these central authorities that are fighting disinformation for the betterment of people, and people claiming that censorship stifling human knowledge and information. And where do you stand on the balance of all that? And how can we navigate that, as this is certainly going to become a major issue in the future?
That's a huge and very important question, and it's of course a very timely one, as you point out. And I struggle with this because we know that a lot of the misinformation and disinformation has caused harm. I mean, it's caused political turmoil. It's confused people about what to do about COVID. And it's illustrative of the amplifying effect of the internet and the World Wide Web and social networking and so on. A lot of people are blaming social networks for their feedback loops and for things like likes and how many views did you get, which lead to extreme behaviors sometimes to get attention. I think some of that is true, but I also think that this huge boon that I believe the World Wide Web and the internet have offered to us as societies around the world, this huge boon in access to and sharing of information has a price. And the price is that we have to be thoughtful about the content that we discover and absorb off of the network. What does thoughtful mean? Well, it takes work to figure out when something is misinformation or disinformation. It's called critical thinking. You should be asking yourself, where did this information come from? Now, of course, it may be hard to figure that out. Provenance may not be obvious. And if you're taking notes here, provenance may turn out to be one of the most important things we can do to associate information that's found online. Where did it come from? What's its provenance? And finding a way to make sure that the provenance can't be falsified is important. So digital signatures might turn out to be a useful tool for that. So critical thinking is what we should all learn. We should teach this to our kids. We should use it ourselves in order to discern the possibility the information we're getting is in fact not valid. Now I have to tell you a little anecdote to explain why this is such a hard problem. It should be obvious, right? This information that the vaccines are dangerous and you should never take them is pretty much discounted now if you look at all the FDA studies and everything else. But it's easy to see how somebody might be fearful. Oh gosh, they did this in the jig time and they didn't test it enough and it might be dangerous. And I heard somebody got autism from being vaccinated. I mean, there are all these conspiracy theory things. But we can hope that people will learn to think. Unfortunately, it is work and some people don't bother. They'd rather be told what to do. I'm sure that that's none of you in this room. So thinking critically will help a great deal. But I have to tell you another little anecdote about a problem that it poses for science. I want you to imagine for a moment that you go to Carrie, let's say 10 years ago, you go to Carrie and you say, Carrie, I have a problem, which I think you can help me with. And Carrie says, okay, based on, suppose it's a scientific problem. And so Carrie says, well, based on everything I know, you should do X for some value of X. And so you go off and you do X. Now, 10 years go by and you're still having a problem. And so you go find Carrie again. You say, Carrie, I'm still having a problem. And she says, well, look, I've been looking at this for the last 10 years now. And so I've learned more, I've understood it better. You should do Y instead of X. Y, of course, not equal to X. Now, you could have one of two reactions to this. The first one, which I hope you would do, is thank you very much. I'm glad to have the additional advice from 10 years of work, and you go off and try Y. But you might have a different reaction. So you lied to me 10 years ago and so about X, and so I don't believe you about Y either. Why does that happen? Because it does happen. And some people think of science as being absolute. If you heard this term, scientifically proved, this is dangerous thought, because science is just the best estimate we have of reality right now. And it's the theories that explain the observations that we've had. The problem is that it's all it is the best estimate. And so more observations and more experiments and more testing could lead you to conclude that theory X is wrong and theory Y is better. Some people react badly to that. And that's why this is such a hard problem to solve, because if you believe that X is true, and this now becomes the basis of all of your actions, and somebody comes along later and says, you know what, there's strong evidence that X isn't true, even if it once was, it isn't anymore. Some people will refuse to believe Y because it means they have to admit they were wrong about X. And, you and I might blame Carrie for that. It's, after all, it was Carrie that told us to go do X. But once you've been persuaded to do something, you double down on it because you don't want to admit it was wrong. So there are lots of other dynamics here than just the simple story that I'm telling you now. But I think it's those sociological, psychological, neurological aspects of the way we process information, which makes this such a hard problem to solve. It's not a simple, this is fact and this is not fact. And the introduction of the meme alternative fact is probably one of the most damaging memes entered into our society in the last decade. It's so easy for people to simply ignore that which you and I might agree is fact by simply asserting this other alternative fact is how I build my universe. So I realize I'm wandering all over everywhere here, but I can tell you that the solution to this problem is going to require better understanding of the dynamics. We should have had anthropologists, sociologists, neuroscientists, and sociologists and the like studying the way in which we built these online systems to anticipate some of the bad side effects that are showing up, or to consider how to combat them. And so that would, I would love to see more attention paid to the sociological side effects of these things. So we have to work on that. And I'm hoping that some of you might turn out to choose to do something along those lines. I can tell you that Google is paying a lot more attention to this now than ever before, but it's a hard problem.
Thank you, Vint.
Thank you.
Our guest here is going to come ask you a question. Please introduce yourself for the hot seat.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Sutardja. I'm from Georgia, and we're also doing the program of innovation and entrepreneurship. But we are going to send students to the Mr. Beckman. Thank you very much for inviting us. By the way, we met with you in 2012 on IGF, and we have a picture.
Wow, so nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. I would like to continue the topic regarding the critical thinking. I think you had the same situation when you invented the internet and tried to explain why it's important to the humans and why it's important to the for the development. We have the same situation now with our team. We are developing a tool which helping to develop critical thinking for kids. And not all parents understood that the critical thinking is important. I think it will be very interesting to get and to listen to your experience, what you did for and how you deal with that nobody believed in this technology, nobody understood the importance of these things, and what was your reaction, and what was perhaps what we need to do?
Well, of course, you know, in the earliest days of all of this, the packet switching idea was considered heresy because the way you did telecommunications was circuit switching. That's how the telephone system worked. How could you possibly want to do this crazy thing about chopping everything up into little electronic postcards and throwing them into the network and switching them and getting them out of order and putting them back in order? That's crazy. Why don't you just dial up the other machine and send the data and hang up? Of course, the reason that we chose this alternative is that we had all the machines all interconnected at the same time, and they're flinging data at each other, you know, distributed across the whole network. So, and we needed to do it quickly, and dialing up and hanging up and redialing would take too long. But people really objected to that. I would say that to overcome that, we had to show that it worked. And so one of those things that about technology is that things that work persist. And sometimes it's too long. Sometimes you wish that they would just stop, you know, let's sunset this and start something else. But things that work persist. And so we worked very hard to make it work and then to make it continue to work. And today, of course, 50 years later, the internet's still running on the basic architecture, although believe me, it's become far more elaborated. We've re-implemented things, we've tweaked various protocols. Thank goodness. I mean, the thing is scaled by 7 orders of magnitude from the time that we first built it to the time that it's running now. And it's hard to imagine designing something that has that kind of scalability. But I can tell you that many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have contributed to finding ways of achieving scalability. Now, on the critical thinking side, here's an example of a place where it backfires. I think you alluded to it, if I interpreted your comment earlier correctly. I remember lecturing in Texas on this whole topic of critical thinking, and I was arguing this is really important. Kids should learn how to do that. They should question the information that they get, understand its basis. And there were some parents who said, we don't like critical thinking. Why is that? It's because our kids disagree with us, or they ask hard questions and they challenge us. And you know, I felt really bad to hear that answer, because that's the wrong answer. The right answer is your kids. It's wonderful that your kids are actually asking questions, wanting to understand the basis for something. That better than I told you so, or just because I told you. I'm just thinking for a minute about it's another anecdote, and it's related to this question. And Carrie, you'll appreciate this. I went to lecture at a university, which will be nameless for now, and I was talking to the professor before class, and she was complaining about the students and their laptops in the class. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he says, well, they're using their laptops. And I thought maybe she was going to say, well, they're, you know, doing tweeting, or they're watching, you know, TikTok videos, or the, you know, social websites, or whatever it is. And I just thought that they were being distracted. And she said, no, that's not what they're doing. So what are they doing? She says, they're looking up the stuff I'm lecturing on, and then they're asking me questions and they're challenging me. And I'm the teacher. And I'm sitting here thinking, holy cow, wait a minute. You're complaining that your students are paying enough attention to your lectures that they want to go look up more stuff and learn more about it? Are you crazy? So I said, okay, all right, I get this. Here's the thing you do. Here's the assignment. Pick any 10 websites. I don't care, just any 10. Here's the assignment. Go to that website, and your assignment is to evaluate the content on the website in order to say whether or not it's credible. And oh, by the way, you're not allowed to use only the internet to do your analysis. There's this other place. It's called a library, and it has things in it that are called books. And there's books that have things in them that the internet doesn't have. And so your assignment is not complete unless you show me you know how to use a library too. And so the whole point here is to get those kids to pay critical attention to the content on the net and train themselves to do that. So if you care about that, I hope that you make that a goal for your work, is to get people to think more critically about what they see and hear.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vint, you said there that you show them that it works, right? You show them that it works and it persists. So how do we show people that critical thinking works? You know, before integration,
Yeah.
right? And how can you prove that?
Well, look, this is why instead of me, you should have a sociologist, a psychologist, and an anthropologist and a neuroscientist with you, because they think about these things. But I'll give you an example of how it can work. At one point, I remember trying to persuade someone that that there was this whatever it was that they had, whatever interaction they had was a scam, and or that was the information was wrong, and they were resisting this. And so I said, well, look, let's just walk through this for a second. I want to show you how people can be fooled. And so I picked a different case. I didn't pick the thing that we were just talking about. I picked another situation where someone had cleverly managed to fool someone into giving away money effectively. And the point here was not to say, you're so stupid, you got fooled. It was more like, let me show you how people, not you in particular, but just how people could be fooled. These are the techniques and the tactics that are used. And it was interesting to note that people were very attentive because they didn't want to be fooled. People don't like being fools. So it turned out that the best argument wasn't, haha, you were fooled, you're stupid. It was more like, let me show you how this can happen to reasonable people. It's not a comment on your intelligence or anything. It's tactics and techniques that people use to fool you. And I don't want you to be fooled. You don't want to be fooled. So that's sometimes that, of course, is the essence of critical thinking, not being fooled. And so sometimes that actually works because you don't have to admit you were fooled necessarily to appreciate how you could be fooled.
Like that. Next to the hot seat.
Right to your right.
Yes, Carlos coming. And Vint, you vindicate me because my undergraduate degree, and I think I've let you guys know this, is in psychology from here.
Great.
Wendy.
Hello there.
Hi, my name is Carla, and I'm from Venezuela. And as you said in your journey as your professional career, it's important to have peers and people that can help you out and that you also can help. And sometimes you don't know what you are doing, but sometimes you are pretty sure that what you are doing, right? My question for you, it will be like, who do you think made that impact in your life that you want to continue and keep, or you continue being in their life or in your life?
So I've been extremely fortunate to have peers and mentors who have helped me. Probably the most notable peer is a man named Steve Crocker, who I met in high school. We met at Van Nuys High, which is in Southern California, just north of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley. We met way back in 1959. He was very excited about computing, and he got permission to use the computers at UCLA while we were still in high school. And so we've been friends ever since, and our jobs have intermingled and gone back and forth. He now lives in Bethesda, and I live in McLean, Virginia. So we're just across the river from each other. So he is and was and still is my best friend. And it's been a journey where he went to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency before I did. Then I came after him. Then I became chairman of ICANN, jumping way ahead. And then he became chairman after I did. So our paths have literally interwoven and hopped back and forth. The best mentor I've had several, but one of them is Robert Kahn, who also lives in McLean now. But he was the guy that started the whole internet idea and then drew me into it while I was at Stanford. I've worked for him once at ARPA and once again at his Corporation for National Research Initiatives. And we still have regular contact almost daily and occasionally get to work together again. So having someone to turn to who is willing to help, first of all, and whose help is useful, it's a tremendous relief to know that you can go somewhere to get help. I've also learned that my chief of staff, who has worked with me since 1984, you can do the math, is another example of getting help. She's worked with me for so long that she knows what I need before I do. And she's really good at it. And one of the things that she's really particularly good at is asking questions to find out good answers to problems, preferably before they happen. So I have benefited from that. I've had role models, I guess, these are people that I haven't necessarily worked closely with, but I've worked a little bit with enough to be very impressed by their work habits and work style. So oh gosh, when you get to be my age, names go right out of your head and they don't stick. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that this, oh, okay, yes, I remember now. Okay, it's George Conrades was former chairman of the board of Bolt, Beranek and Newman, the company that built the ARPANET. And I got to know George a little later than that, but he was one of those absolutely trustable people who would tell you candidly what he thought in a kindly way. If he thought what you were doing was wrong, he was good at it. He was good at explaining why it was wrong, as opposed to saying, "You dumbass, you should have come up with a better plan." So I've kept in touch with George off and on, and I always wanted to try to emulate his depth of knowledge and his style of management, which was very calm. It wasn't pound the table. It wasn't, throw a chair through a window like Steve Ballmer used to do at Microsoft. That's not leadership. I'm not even sure what to call it, but it certainly isn't leadership in my book. So having people whose style and knowledge is admirable to you is really valuable. So I've been so lucky to be surrounded by people who I can turn to for help, to get questions answered, or get connected. So there's another thing you might want to keep in mind. I'm a tinker toy guy, in the sense that if I see two people who look like they ought to be talking to each other because they look like they have some useful experiences, I like to plug them together to find out what happens. And I have a personal example of getting plugged together to find out what happens. My wife and I met in 1965. How did we meet? Well, she was totally deaf. So she was a lip reader, but she wore this big, fat, heavy hearing aid thing. And I wear 2 hearing aids, and I've been wearing hearing aids since I was 13. So it turned out we had the same hearing aid dealer. And one day he decided to perform a chemistry experiment. So he asked me to come in, didn't tell me why, and he asked her to come in, didn't tell her why. Well, actually, she had to go in because her hearing aid broke, and she had to get it fixed, and she wasn't in a good mood because she had to blow her first paycheck, first check she ever got for working on a damn new hearing aid. So she was unhappy. So he introduces us, and then he closes the store. And we're out on the sidewalk on Wilshire Boulevard in downtown Los Angeles, and she's really cute. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I keep this going? So I said, well, why don't we have some lunch? So she agreed, and we went and had lunch, and I asked her, so what do you do? And she says, I'm a renderer. And I said, well, isn't that something that cuts up whale blubber or something? And she didn't look like she had the, the kind of body to do that. And she said, no, I'm an artistic renderer. I render what, the building is going to look like, or an interior is going to look like after it's all done, so the customer can see what it will look like in sort of a perspective rendering. So the conversation went on, and then she asked if I wanted to see her favorite painting at the LA County Art Museum, which is down the street. So anything to keep this going, right? So I went with her, and she sticks me in front of a Kandinsky painting, and I'm looking at it, and all I can think of is it looks like a floating green hamburger. And so now this is, if this were a movie where the audience gets to hold up paddles, she gets to decide either I'm a hopeless Philistine or I'm repairable. So fortunately, she decided I'm repairable. So 56 years later, we'll celebrate our 56th anniversary this year. But the part I wanted to tell you about is that after this connection gets made, it's worked out okay. She got 2 cochlear implants in 1996 and 2006. She hears again. She can hear now, and she can use the phone and watch TV and everything else. So we called the hearing aid dealer, and we said, guess what? Sigrid can hear now, and we're still married. So that's plugging people together successfully.
Thank you very much.
And then I assume that both your high school friend Steve and Bob Kahn have no problem with telling you when they think you're wrong or off mark. They're not just people who support you.
That's correct. And candor is, you cannot overvalue candor. It can be delivered in a painful and harmful way, and I would urge you to try to avoid that. But candor is so valuable that when people tell you, well, I don't think this is right for the following reasons, you should thank them for that. Even if in the end you decide either not to follow their advice, or maybe you persuade them that they're wrong. But the fact that they were comfortable coming to you with that position is super valuable. And you want, from the leadership point of view, you want people who are that report to you to feel the freedom to do that. That's really important. Yes, sir.
Hey there, I'm Bennett. You mentioned you're from LA, now you're on the East Coast. I'm actually from Potomac, Maryland, and now I'm out in LA. So
Across the river.
yeah, a bit of a flip-flop there. So people have talked about having mentors, having peers to turn to. But once you've gathered that team and you're actually working on some engineering project, something that might seem insurmountable, what's your thought process in approaching such a big problem like that once you have the team?
So first of all, before we go further, it's kind of cool that you grew up not far from where I live right now. But I have to tell you, my younger son's name is Bennett. And for those of you who have any memory of this, there is a famous book, a famous author and Random House founder, Vint Cerf. And he passed away in 1971. We decided that Vint Cerf, we needed another Vint Cerf, so we named our younger son Vint Cerf. Here's the irony. His whole name is Bennett Christopher Cerf. It turns out that Vint Cerf's son, the other one, is Christopher Bennett Cerf. And so we introduced the two of them. They know each other, and now we're all family friends. Okay, so now your question was, what do we do when we encounter the insurmountable? Let me give you 2 kinds of examples of this. One of them, this is startup advice. One of the problems a startup has is what's called insurmountable opportunity. What this means is that too many possibilities have shown up, and you need to not be distracted. You need to stay on course, unless you figured out that that course is not going to work, then you need to pick a different course, but you don't want to be distracted. too many different things to try can really ruin a startup. Then there's the other kind where you're on the project, you're going along, and all of a sudden something happens that looks like it just is impossible. Now, remember that my previous boss, Bob Kahn, and to do the impossible, first you have to believe it isn't. And so there are several ways of dealing with what look like impossible problems. The first one is to figure out that it isn't impossible, that there is a solution to the problem, but you just have to think it through. Another possibility is that you change the rules of the game so that that isn't the thing you have to do. Maybe you change the way the product works, maybe you change the product as that's offered, but the idea here is that you essentially change the it's like changing the battlefield in a way. A third possibility is that it's impossible, but there might be a reason that it's impossible. For example, suppose that it's a consequence of policy that something is impossible. Well, what if you could change the policy? Then it wouldn't be impossible anymore. And this takes me back to an earlier comment that I made, which I'd like to hang on just a second, interrupt. I'm getting to choose what time is dinner. So thank you, that was important. Okay, so let me go back to the whole idea here about changing the landscape so as to make something possible that looked like it was impossible before. Sometimes it will turn out that someone will come to you and say, I can't do what you asked me to do. Either I'm overloaded, don't have enough resources. There's a whole bunch of other reasons for this. If they come to you soon enough, you may be able to change the equation. You know, they come to you with this is impossible, I cannot do this. And if they give you enough warning, you might be able to say, well, we don't have to do that. We can do something different. So my sense for dealing with what looks like the impossible is to try to find a way to make it not impossible. Sometimes it turns out you just have to blast your way through the damn wall. And I've been through those occasions too, where people just go all out. I just learned about an example of that in the middle of COVID, right in the middle of what's, you know, the Black Friday and the Cyber Monday, where something new capacity needed to be generated in a real big hurry. And so people just went flat out, burned themselves out, and got it done. But that's not a good way to run a business. So, so helping people find an alternative to what looks like the impossible is a good thing. Now, one other example, you know about optical fiber, and you know how important that has been in the internet. Things go really fast over optical fiber. Today's backbone, by the way, is running at 400 gigabits a second. The original ARPANET backbone was running at 50 kilobits a second. That's 7 orders of magnitude difference. It's astonishing you can still run the same protocols. But the reason I bring this up is that there's latency associated with transmitting signals in an optical fiber because the speed of light is slower in glass than it is in the atmosphere. And that looks like an insurmountable latency. You know, just you have to go through a certain number of miles of fiber. It's going to take you a certain amount of time at 90,000 miles a second. What if you could have hollow fibers so that the signal went through atmosphere in the fiber instead of going through glass? That would allow the speed to go at 180,000 miles a second. Well, it turns out that there's a guy at the University of Southampton who's the original inventor of erbium doped fiber, which allowed you to transmit a long ways without repeaters or regenerating the signal. He's now building hollow fibers so that we can get there sooner. So that's another example of essentially conquering the impossible, and that's building hollow fiber. It's sort of like I always wondered how they got the hole in the macaroni. I've never been to a macaroni producing plant, but I would really love to see how that works. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I had a second question, but wait, I thought we were.
No, I'm just gassing away here. So go ahead.
So I often watch a podcast, and at the end of the podcast, the host asks the same question. It doesn't matter who the host is, old, young. He says, "How do you live a happy life?" And so I wanted your take on, beyond career, beyond leadership. I want to be happy. How do I do it?
So I have
a much harder question.
It's actually a wonderful question. I love that. Well, the first thing is that 20 feet from here, I have a wine cellar full of 2,000 bottles of wine. And it has room for 3,000 bottles, but we've been drinking some of it. So my theory here is that we bought the wine to drink. So it gives us incentive to keep going. We can drink about a half a bottle a night between us. So that's 4,000 nights. And that's more than 10 years. It's like 12 years or something. And so that's our longevity thing, is that as long as the wine hasn't been consumed, we have incentive to keep going. So we're happy about that. What makes me happy more than anything, I think, is doing something meaningful and productive. Being productive and feeling like you're doing something meaningful is the essence of happiness in my world. So if you were stuck doing something that didn't feel productive, or you didn't feel as if it was meaningful, that's really hard to stay happy. And I've been just frankly super lucky that every job I've ever had has felt productive, even if you might say it wasn't. The first job I ever had was replenishing the coffee in a coffee making machine. This is a thing that looked like rotary engine on those single prop airplanes with the cylinders sticking out in all directions. That's what this coffee maker machine looked like. When you open up the door, everyone is loaded with coffee grounds. So by the time they get through all 8 or whatever the number was, they're all covered with yellow mold, and it's horrible. So I'm 14 years old, and that's my job, is to clean it all up, put new coffee in. And the one thing I do remember from that job is when you opened the tin for the first time and the coffee went, it was the most wonderful smell in the world. I didn't like drinking coffee, but it smelled great. So even then, I look back on that and I think, that was productive because somebody got a good fresh cup of coffee out of my work. And then the jobs got more interesting as time went on. So for me, it's meaningful work. And feeling and being productive and being surrounded by people who are optimistic. I'm fundamentally optimistic. I mean, that's it. I don't know whether you have to learn to do that or whether you're just built with an optimistic gene on. But for me, that keeps me going. I refuse to be depressed about anything, because if somebody says something to make you feel bad, my reaction is, then they win. And I don't like that. I like to win. So I refuse to be disappointed or depressed by anything that happens, because then something else wins, and I just want to be happy. So I stay optimistic. You should do the same thing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. We're
which I know is what we grabbed you for. Let's have Malik, and I have one other question after that from Ken, who runs our center. So I'm going to hold you a few more minutes if we can.
Sure, we can do that. It's okay.
How's it going? Thank you so much for your time. My name is Malik. I'm a senior. So I was wondering, obviously you've done your due diligence in higher education. You mentioned you got your Ph.D., also just stuck around higher education for a while after you were done with your schooling. Obviously, a lot of people take a lot of different routes to their professional career. Some people graduate, they start working, and then they go back to school. Some people never go back to school. And I mean this in the most flattering way possible. After you finished your education, you've been on the cutting edge of an ever-evolving industry for a very long time now. So I was wondering, what are some of your favorite ways or mediums or methods in which you continue to acquire knowledge to kind of avoid reaching that plateau of understanding in both the industries and topics that you already know a lot about, and also in new areas that you hope to learn more about?
So it's a wonderful question. Thank you so much for that one. First of all, I did leave school. I finished my Ph.D. at UCLA. I went to Stanford to teach and do research. And then I went into the government. And then I went into the private sector. Then I went into the nonprofit research sector. Then I went back into profit-making operation. Then I joined Google and been there ever since. So I've oscillated back and forth among various and sundry kinds of business. And all of it has been satisfying because of the point you made, which is I'm continuing to learn new things. And I recognize, I hope the rest of you have the same experience where the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And if you've ever met some people who know almost nothing, they think they know everything because they don't know that there's anything else to know. So for me, learning new things literally on a daily basis is what keeps me going. As an example, I spent about 5 hours yesterday I was inside of one of Google's data centers. And I've been in a number of them over the years, but the technology is rapidly evolving. And so this one looked very different from the one I saw 3 years ago. But I got to ask questions and people were willing to answer them. And so the thing which is probably the most satisfying for me about where I am now and where I've been in the past is that I get to learn new things. And I think you'll discover that people who are learning new things are the happiest in their work. If you're not learning anything new, it's very possible that you feel, like you're not making progress or, it's getting bored. I'm never bored because there's so much going on, so many new things to learn. And as an example, I realize we're going to way over time here. Well, the short story is that I worked on the Apollo engines for the F1 engines for the big Saturn V rockets when I was 18. I got to do some of the failure analysis to figure out whether they were going to last until they ran out of fuel, and then we didn't care after that. Unlike Elon Musk, who likes to preserve the first stage and use it again, which is absolutely science fiction, and it's wonderful. So every single job I've ever had has forced me to learn something new. When I was at DARPA as a program manager, the people who were working on my projects knew more than I did about projects. And so I got to learn from them. I could go there and they had to answer my questions because I was writing the check. But almost everybody is happy to answer questions because it shows you're interested. And it means that what they're doing is important to you. So I'm very happy with the sequence of events. I really do think that people who finish their bachelor's degrees might do well to spend a couple of years doing something other than school. In my case, I went to work for IBM after my undergraduate years, and I'm glad I did because I got an immediate taste of what it was like to be in the computer science field. And I learned a pile of stuff, including knowing that I didn't know enough about operating systems and compiler design and a lot of other things. And so I made myself go back to school at UCLA to get a PhD because I wanted to. I knew why I was there. So taking a gap year or something after a bachelor's degree, not a bad idea at all. I took 2.
And if time permits, a quick, a little more pointed follow-up is like, if you do not have those resources immediately around you, more specifically relating to human personnel that you can ask questions to. Let's say you already know the most about a certain subject, or nobody around you knows anything about the subject that you hope to kind of explore. What's your first step in terms of trying to acquire more information?
I go to Google and I find out whether I can get it on the internet, and which lets me make the point, we got to get everybody up on the net. We have to get them access to it affordably. Not everybody wants to use the web or the worldwide or the internet. And I wouldn't force anybody to, but for me, I can't write a paper anymore without being online, able to Google something, because the details either I never knew or I've forgotten. And it's super helpful, but you have to think critically about what you find on the net, because some of it might be misinformation. Just like reading Wikipedia is mostly pretty amazing. Even the stuff you know something about, you'll find some mistakes here and there. But for me, that's been the most dramatic element of my career, not just being involved in invention of it, but rather its use. And so I don't know about the rest of you, but I learned a few years ago that a lot of people who are younger than I am, that's almost everybody now, tended to go to YouTube instead of to Google search to figure out how to do things. You know, like, how do I do X for some value of X? And so I thought, oh, well, you know, that's just kids, you know, when they grow up, they'll use the Google search. Until one weekend, my wife and I decided we wanted to make Chinese eggplant, and we didn't have a clue how to do that. So I thought, well, why don't I try this thing that the kids are doing? I would go over to YouTube and I said, how do I make Chinese eggplant? And I get 17 videos showing me how to make Chinese eggplant, including picking, you know, have you ever seen the Chinese eggplant? It's a long, skinny kind of gray thing instead of that fat black thing that I always think of as eggplant. So we get out, we get the eggplant and all the other things, and we follow the videos and we make it. And it actually came out pretty well. So I'm a big fan now of YouTube for finding things out. But I confess to you that if before the internet was available, before there was all this content, we kept books around the house. I had encyclopedias, and we made heavy use of the library. So if there's a question, find the answer. That's the whole idea.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And you can find the people, also get leads to people who know the answers and reach out to them, and some of them will answer.
It's all true.
We're gonna have the last question is going to come from Ken Singer, who's our director in this center, and he is online, so I think you can see him.
I can see you.
Good to see you. Thank you so much for doing this, by the way. This is such a treat at the end of the semester. So I'm going to ask you just a career question as well. So a lot of seniors in this room, and one of the things that I've run into working with young minds is that they're terrified of making the wrong decision with their career. And, you know, everything's about opportunity costs. And there's this whole concept of FOMO, fear of missing out. So students are constantly thinking about what are their friends doing? Oh, I should go work for this consulting firm, or I should go do this. And they're constantly worried that they are, you know, doing the wrong thing. And so if you could share with us, because all we see typically is someone's choices that they make in their careers. They don't see all of the alternative lives they could lead. Maybe you could share with the students some of the, you know, career choices or opportunities that you passed up for the career that you've chosen, because we see the amazing place you are right now, but it'd be great to understand all the other things that you had to give up.
Well, actually, I don't know if you were around for the earlier examples I gave where I said no, and I was forced to say yes.
Yes.
And so those were actually would have been career mistakes if you think about it, because it's pretty clear. It's like standing in front of a forest. You have no idea exactly how you're going to get through the forest. Now, when you get about halfway into the forest, you can turn around and look back, and you can see how you got there.
Right.
But I have to tell you that all of my colleagues, especially all of my successful colleagues, would tell you point blank they did not plan their careers. They absolutely did not plan their careers. And the reason they didn't is that you can't, really. What you can do is be aware of opportunity or to help create opportunity. So how do you do that? Well, one thing you do is you hang out a lot with people that you admire and who know more than you do. You learn from them, and you may actually encounter an opportunity that shows up just because one of those friends knows something. And some jobs, in my case, have popped up just because a friend says, you know, you should go talk to so-and-so. So it's not that I think you should just wander through life with your blinders on, but I don't think that you should imagine that you must plan your career step by step or that it will somehow go awry. The world is changing.
It seems
We will all-
consistent. Oh, sorry. It seems consistent with TCP/IP, right? You can't actually plan the route too, right?
Well, we assume that something else is going to figure out how the route's going to go, and you let that happen in real time. And that's kind of what my career and others have experienced, which is that you have to make a choice eventually. But for young people especially, I could not overemphasize this enough. You have plenty of time to choose something that turns out not to be satisfying. It's okay if you pick something that didn't work out. You have plenty of time to recover from that. So now we have a society here in the U.S., especially where changing jobs is common and relatively easy. I suppose there might be some other environments where that's less difficult, not as easy. It's more difficult. But I still adhere to the belief that while you're young, you should feel freedom to try things out and not imagine that this first decision is going to be absolutely critical. Now, it very well may turn out as you look back at your career that a particular decision might have been, central to the career you ended up having. And if you had chosen something else, you wouldn't have ended up where you are. That doesn't necessarily mean that the other path would have been bad and you avoided a bullet. It just means that you made good choices for the career you ended up having. But I don't believe that you should pretend to make a decision early in your life that will somehow determine the success of the rest of your career. There's plenty of room for adjustment.
Thank you.
We will take that as the end, although it kills me to let you go. You have given us extra time and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Vint.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Carrie. I appreciate the opportunity and I wish you all well. You're coming into your working careers in the middle of a great deal of turmoil. But I can tell you there's an old adage that says on the edge of chaos lies opportunity. And there's a lot of truth to that because at the edge of chaos is an unformed space waiting to be disciplined, and that's your job. So thanks everybody. I hope we'll cross paths on the net.